Hello, everyone. I am so happy to be talking to you today. I am talking with Dan Harris about handling holiday stress, how to keep calm, how to have fun, how to deal with difficult people, and more. So, I am going to do a few things just to get set up. While I'm doing that, please tell me where you're watching from because that is always so fun to see where people are watching from. But bear with me while while I do like the technical stuff. Hang on. Hang on. I don't see what I'm looking for. One moment. I don't see that. Okay, now I'm going to see if I can get Dan. Okay, here we go. And he should be joining in 1 second. Oh, wait, where is he? I still see his name there. Accept. Oh gosh. Okay, well tell me where you're watching from. Okay, Elmhurst, Illinois, Houston. Oh, there we go. Hey, looks like we got a guest here.
Yes, that's
Ex-
That's Alexander Harris.
Hey, Alexander, you got your tree up.
Yes, we have two trees.
Excellent. And
We go hard for the holidays.
okay. We do the same. That I got to bring in some cheer to my office. I'm realizing it's all elsewhere in my apartment. So before we jump in, I want to just let people know. So Dan Harris is an old friend, and he is the author of the 10% Happier book and other books. He's the co-founder of the 10% Happier app, which is all about mindfulness meditation. It's so great. He's the guy that got me to try meditation the second time. Still didn't work, still didn't take, but I wasn't going to try it until Dan gave me, like, he was so persuasive I had to try it. But Dan, I know you've thought so deeply about how we can get up in our heads and we are not managing ourselves in a mindful, intentional way when we're really stressed out. So I have a bunch of questions that I want to ask you about things that I know people are facing during this busy holiday season.
Great, great.
Well, the first thing I want to ask you is, what do you do? When you're facing this or you're talking to people about, like, you're not in your usual schedule? Like, I think this is something that maybe comes up with meditation specifically, but also with exercise, getting enough sleep, like you're traveling, maybe you're with people that you're not usually with, and you're not in your usual routine and you're not keeping up with the things that usually keep you feeling like grounded and healthy. How do you handle that?
So, like, I mean, during the holidays, you're on the road, or you've got people staying at your house, and you fall out of your routine, and you get
Yes.
into your head about what a slovenly, sloth-like creature you are. That
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yes.
I'm speaking from some experience.
We've all done it. We've all been there. What steps do you take?
How familiar are you, Gretchen, with the concept of self-compassion?
Very.
Okay.
Yes. And explain it because this is so
Sure.
key.
It was just pioneered, this idea, by a really incredible psychologist and researcher from the University of Texas, Kristen Neff. And the idea is that many of us, myself included, really believe that in order to get anything done, or in order to succeed in life, we need to have an inner drill sergeant. But in fact, Kristen's research has shown that having a supportive inner coach makes you more successful, more likely to reach your goals, and more resilient. Actually, it's something that Alexander and I talk about a lot because we play a lot of catch together. And I notice that if he doesn't throw the frisbee or the football the way he wants it to, he'll start talking to himself out loud in a really negative way. And we talk a lot about how. But then you stop, yes. But then we talk a lot about how I want him to kind of internalize my voice for him, which is saying, okay, so maybe that one wasn't the way you wanted it to go, but you're still really good and you can do well on the next time. And talking to yourself the way you would talk to a friend has been shown,
or your son,
or your son, has been shown in study after study, not only by Kristen, but also by Ethan Cross, who's at the University of Michigan, who's done a lot of really interesting research that he wrote up in a book called Chatter, that you can kind of counter program against this obnoxious voice in your head just by getting into the habit of noticing when you're suffering and talking to yourself in a different way. And so I think that's really applicable during all of the many opportunities for suffering we will have over the holidays.
And do you have any like phrases that you often say to yourself, like, well, Dan, that's not your best day, or Dan, you learned that lesson the hard way, or hey, Dan, you know not to stand next to the buffet table like for 2 hours. I mean, like, are there any kind of like mantras or kind of things that you sort of invoke to put yourself in that place of self-compassion?
Yes. No. I'm being, sometimes, by the way, self-compassion does not, talking to yourself the way you would talk to a friend or your child doesn't mean that you're not tough. In fact, Kristen talks a lot about fierce self-compassion. If your child is doing something, if your child is doing something that might put them in danger or being annoying or inappropriate, you have to be direct. And that is true for yourself. Like a good coach doesn't tell you you're doing a great job when you're not doing a great job. He or she or they just talk to you in a supportive way, but in a clear way. They have your best interests at heart. And so I'm on a little bit of a digression here, but I think that is really important to know because it's not going to make you go soft. In fact, having this kind of attitude externally and internally can make you a better communicator with yourself and others. But however, that is not the question you asked me. What, remind me again what the question
phrase, like, do you have any go-to phrases that you use with yourself?
And with Alexander, he wants to know. For me, the phrase, I sometimes, if I notice that I am freaking out about something, often my two big spheres for freakouts are productivity. Actually, probably three big spheres for freaking out. Productivity, if I feel like I'm running behind and not getting my stuff done. The second is like food and how I look in the mirror, and we should talk about food stuff during the course of the conversation.
We'll talk about that's on my list.
That's on your list. It's a huge issue in the holidays, obviously. And then the third area is just sort of overall nebulous fear and dread around my career and whatever. So those
general angst.
Yes.
Heightened by holiday. Yeah.
Well, mostly it's related. It's stuff about work. So it's kind of related to area number one. So mostly what I do is if I notice that I'm having, and this is where meditation is really useful because your self-awareness goes up. If I notice that I'm feeling stressed, usually that manifests as a real tightness in my chest. Then I might put and it took me a long time to get over the hump because I found this to be very, very cheesy, but I will sometimes put my hand on my chest or on my heart. And again, there's a lot of data to support the efficacy of this strategy. And just say, it's all good, dude. That's my little catchphrase. And then I will talk to myself internally, the way I would talk to a friend who is in the same situation.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, on your point about like that showing self-compassion doesn't necessarily make you kind of complacent. Like I looked at this a lot about habit formation, which is was one of my big interests. And one of the things they found is that people who are really hard on themselves, if they sort of fell off the wagon or didn't keep a habit, you think that would make you very energized to get back into it. But actually they found the same thing. I'm sure it's the same body of research, that the people who showed compassion towards themselves were more likely to re-engage.
Yes.
And so if you think like, well, I need to keep this habit, like these ways of talking to yourself in a way and giving yourself a little bit of that, that grace that you would give to somebody else, but still maintaining your standards for yourself and like the things that you know are good for you, actually makes you more likely to follow through, not less likely, which is what I think you're exactly right. A lot of people think that if you're not in that state, then you're just gonna go, you're just gonna give up. And that's not, yeah.
I mean, I think sometimes it's a misunderstanding about what the word compassion, because it's a big word and it often can either sound anodyne or just gooey. But it really is a very down to earth mode, which is, it's kind of, when we think of the word empathy often means you're resonating with somebody else's suffering. Compassion is empathy plus the desire to help. And it does not have to be grand. It can be holding the door open for somebody. It can be asking somebody if they need a hand crossing the street. It can be really simple stuff, but it's empathy plus the desire to help. And that desire to help is ennobling and invigorating, and it's what now I have a kid and a cat here.
All right, bring it on.
It's a kind of an analogy for this household during the holidays.
Yeah.
But that add-on of wanting to help is ennobling and invigorating, and it's what prevents burnout, because people can get empathy burnout from empathizing too much with other people. But if you add on the desire to help, it actually gives you a sense of agency and helps you not get drowned in the suffering. And this compassion can be directed internally. You deserve it, not because you need to be special or to have done anything special. You deserve compassion by dint of the fact that you are suffering and you need the help. And this is
Dan
an
just froze for me. Hang on.
Oops, sorry.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. You deserve compassion by dint of the fact that
you are suffering. You don't need to have done anything special to deserve it. And compassion or love or whatever is an omnidirectional force that you can send outwards and you can send toward yourself. And I think a lot of us overlook this fact and also misunderstand what compassion is.
Right. Okay. Well, sort of on that. So you were talking about self-compassion. Okay. Now let's switch to another thing it's a big stumbling block for people during the holidays, which is difficult people. Being with people where, maybe, there's all different ways that people are difficult. How can we more mindfully, get through these interactions in ways that we, make it manageable in the moment? We don't look back with regret because we've lost our temper or said things that we didn't mean, or just kind of handled ourselves badly, or feel like we walked into a situation that we wish that we had avoided. How can we think through difficult relationships?
Well, there's so much to say on this, so I'm not going to get it all out in the first answer. But one thing I'll say at the beginning here is actually self-compassion is really useful here, because you are going to screw this up. And nobody is perfect. And
there's no magic words that are going to make everything fine or, go away.
Right. And we all have our limits. And, that obnoxious uncle might push you too far. Or your kid may be jumping in the Instagram one too many times or whatever it is. And so you have to give yourself some grace that you almost certainly will mess this up. And you need to be able to come back from that in ways that don't make everything worse. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that's really good to remember that, that holding yourself to a perfect standard is just going to be very frustrating and discouraging, and it's not realistic. And so it's not very helpful.
Exactly. So a couple of tools that help for me in terms of dealing with difficult people. One is kind of a deep hack, which is that there are forms of meditation specifically designed to make you better at your in terms of your baseline attitude vis-a-vis difficult people, or as the Buddhists sometimes call them, enemies. They don't necessarily mean enemies the way we do, but they basically mean difficult people. And there's a kind of meditation called loving kindness meditation. Again, this is the type of thing that initially for me was unattractive, because that name, loving kindness, struck me as very sort of hallmark. But there's been an enormous amount of research into this form of meditation. And it shows that it can have psychological, physiological, and even behavioral benefits, and including for children. And I'll describe the practice in very basic terms, and anybody can go on and do it on their own. But you sit with your eyes closed, and you start by envisioning somebody easy, like a child or a pet, and you send 4 phrases. May you be happy, may you be safe, may you be healthy, may you live with ease. And then you move on to yourself, and then you move on to a mentor, and then a neutral person, and then a difficult person. After the difficult person, you move on to all beings everywhere. So that's the broad scope of the practice, which can be done in 5 minutes on your couch. Oh, my son is picking on one of our cats who he thinks should be the difficult person.
Oh, okay.
The cat scratched him at dinner, so that's why.
Okay.
But actually, that does speak to the way to do this practice, which is that you don't want to start with Pol Pot or any political figure you find completely obnoxious. You want to start with a kind of mildly annoying person, like the cat is misbehaving or the neighbor who maybe asks too many nosy questions, and then build up from there.
Wait,
And
a listener is asking you to repeat those 4 questions. So would you repeat the 4 questions again?
the 4 phrases are:
The four
may you be
phrases. Okay.
happy, may you be safe, may you be healthy, may you live with ease. So, and you can find instructions for loving kindness meditation on the internet very easily. So if you didn't have a chance to write this down, or you're worried you might forget it, it's very easy to find. Anyway, this is a deep hack because over time this can flood the mind with a baseline level of warmth and friendliness that really I've seen in my own life after having done this for many years. That I am no saint, but my general attitude vis-a-vis difficult people has softened in really meaningful ways. But that doesn't help you in the moment necessarily right now if you've never done it before and you're worried. The holidays are on our doorstep, and so what do we do about that? Another thing that I have found really helpful is something called reflective listening. Do you know what that is?
A little bit. Yeah, I think I know. Yeah, but explain it.
Okay, so reflective listening is this tool that was taught to me by these two incredible people, Dan Klerman and Mudita Nisker. They are a married couple. They are communications coaches, and their approach is very much influenced by Buddhism and meditation. They're both deep practitioners. She is also a couples counselor, so they're very highly qualified people to do this kind of work. And I've been working with them for several years, and they've taught me many things, but probably the most easily grokkable and understandable and immediately applicable thing was reflective listening. So if somebody's talking to you and they're being annoying, instead of reacting, one way to give your brain a chance to calm down is to try to reflect back to them in your words what you believe they've said. So somebody's on some big political rant and it's really pressing your buttons, or somebody's complaining about the cleanliness of your home. You might just restate what you heard to them in your own words very briefly. As Mudita says, just reflect the bones of what they said. This has two big benefits. One is it can short circuit what might be your rapid progress to freaking out and reacting kind of blindly and habitually to what the person has said. And the second is it is an incredibly, they would not like this term, but it's an incredibly effective manipulation technique, because one of the deepest needs of human beings is to be seen and heard. And if you demonstrate to somebody that they've been heard, it's a primordially pleasing maneuver, and it is likely to bring the temperature down. Does that all that land for you?
Absolutely. And it reminds me of one of my very favorite parenting books. It's called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk, which is like decades old. It's so good. And everything they say in it is just as applicable to adults as it is to children. And they have a lot of things like kind of hacks for helping you what they call acknowledge the reality of other people's feelings.
Yeah.
Because they point out that we'll often tell people they don't feel what they say they feel, like, oh, you don't mind this, you enjoy this, you're not hungry, you are hungry, you always have fun when we do this, it's going to be great, you're going to have, you'll have a good time. And it's like, you're not listening to what they're saying. And one of the things kind of building on what you're saying is is it a kind of reflective listening? I don't know, but one of the things they say to do with children is to give them their wish and fantasy. So you say, if I had a magic wand, I would do that, or I wish I could, so that you show that you're hearing somebody saying, like, somebody's like, well, that we're going to be late, and you're like, man, I wish I could snap my fingers and we would just be there in a flash. Because again, it's like showing that you're hearing what somebody's, because we all feel like you're not listening to me, and that just builds the frustration and the anger. And so when you can show that, I think so. And you said there was another aspect to it as well.
Well, one other thing you can do that is sort of next level reflective listening is and this is a little bit of lingo from Dan and Mudita, the aforementioned communications coach, is you can reflect somebody's positive intention. Often implicit in somebody's rant is something they want, a positive intention on their part.
Ooh, okay, yes.
And to have that articulated back to you is actually very powerful. So you might be going on and on about your mother-in-law might be complaining about the state of the house, and you might just say, "Oh, so it seems like order and lack of clutter." I use that word clutter knowingly that it's a trigger word for you in a positive way, Gretchen Rubin. Lack of clutter or decluttering seems really important to you. That you feel better when things are a certain way. And just stating in that way, it's like you're in their mind and advocating for them. So they not only feel heard, they feel supported.
Yes. Well, and somebody was asking in the questions, do you say this aloud? And it's quite clear you are meant to say this aloud because it's supposed to help the communication between the two, between the two of you.
Well, it's a fair question that one of the questioners or viewers posted, because a lot of what I was talking about at the top of this conversation was rewiring your own internal dialogue. And now we're talking about your external dialogue.
Right. Well, earlier, switching gears again, earlier you mentioned the issue of like wanting to eat healthfully, drink healthfully during the holiday times, and this is a big issue for a lot of people. What you seem like you had a lot to say. What are your thoughts on that particular challenge?
I've been really influenced by a woman named Evelyn Triboulet. I went through a lot of times in my life where I was a little sort of either I would swing back and forth between having very strict rules and then having no rules. Mm-hmm. And I remember a conversation with you once, Gretchen, we were talking about sugar. You don't eat sugar. And I think at that time I was eating sugar, but I was kind of crazy about it. And I think you said something to me about how you had this dialogue in your head about, what am I going to have sugar tonight? How much? And it was just got very boring. And so you ultimately decided to quit eating sugar. So anyway, I had all sorts of hang-ups around food, and I would criticize. I worked in television for 28 years, and so I would have to look at my face all the time, and I would get sort of in my head, not sort of, really deeply in my head about this stuff, what I was eating and how I looked. So Evelyn is one of the two founders of something called intuitive eating. Sorry, I just ate, and I'm probably losing my voice.
Someone's asking you to say her last name again. Would you maybe spell that?
Triboulet, Tribole. Wonderful person. Also, you'll see this as a theme. I didn't know this when I met her, but she happens to also be a practicing Buddhist and a deep meditator. And intuitive eating, if I was to describe it in a very brief way, is no rules, except listen to your body. So eat when you're hungry, stop eating when you're full. Eat what you want. Don't listen to somebody else's dietary rules, but understand the general rules of nutrition and then follow them in a gentle way. So I don't know if I'm summing this up. I think I'm summing it up reasonably correctly. Does it make sense to you what I'm saying?
Yeah, and and I've heard a lot of people talk about it, and that was my sense of what it is, which it's really about tuning into your body and not letting yourself get overpowered by kind of bliss points in processed food, or kind of what people say you should have or shouldn't have, but really try to keep it.
It's really the latter point there. It's the shoulds that other people are coming up with, understanding that, and I believe the data show that dieting actually is a predictor of weight gain. That we go into these strict diets, but we can't keep it up. And so
I want to stop you there.
Great.
As somebody who is like a very committed low carb eater, and that works great for me, I wouldn't say you can't do it, because you can do it. For many people, they don't choose to do it, or it's not easy for them, or it's not what they want to do. But the idea that it's not possible to do it, I just want to say, like, if it works for you the way it works for me, it's possible. It just may not be something that works the way a lot of people. It's not a good tool for everybody. But and maybe it's not a good tool for you, but as somebody where that's a tool that works really well for me, I just have to like
I think
type
the
up.
issue here is the data are show they don't they show how diets work across large population sets. And so generally speaking, strict diets don't tend to last for most people.
That's true.
You are, I think you and I are both actually pretty far on the outlier spectrum in terms of our willingness and ability to stick with things for a long
You
time.
think? You
Yeah.
think?
So
Yeah,
for
we're both
most
extreme personalities, if nobody's noticed.
exactly. So for most people, dieting is really hard and it doesn't tend to last. And in fact, it throws you into the opposite of self-compassion because it then goes into a shame spiral. You feel like a failure, and then you get into binge eating. And so it's from what I can tell from the data, it doesn't seem to be the healthiest move for most people. Now, it may work for some people. Absolutely, we're talking in generalizations here.
And then, of course, the people who have a very healthy relationship with eating maybe aren't in this pool to be considered. So
Correct.
we have to like whenever there's research, you got to poke into a little bit. So
Yes.
stipulate to that
Yes.
that one could. There's a lot to be that we're not going to get into there about how you might frame this question, but in any event, you have found that for you, data point of one, this approach has been much more successful. And given that that's how you feel, and that's an approach that works, what do you do when you come into a situation where there's, huge spread with every kind of treat? So you have facing a lot of temptation, and then maybe you're with people who are like, well, you have to have a piece of my pumpkin pie, and it's not Christmas if you're not eating gingerbread, and you have to, and how can you skip the eggnog? It's just one night a year. How do you manage those kinds of that kind of incoming thoughts and kind of stimulus?
I eat it. I just try to listen to my body, and it doesn't always work. Alexander and I went to the movies yesterday, and one of the things that Evelyn talks about is when you're distracted, it's very easy to overeat. So
Right.
I probably had more popcorn than I needed, but I don't actually go into much of a spiral anymore about it. It's like, okay, I was at the movies. It's so much fun to be at the movies with my son. And so I didn't feel that great when we left, but who cares? It's fine. And
I don't think I can have. I don't think there is too much popcorn.
Alexander doesn't believe there's such a thing as too much popcorn, which, may be true. Anyway, my point is, if I'm at a Christmas party, I do eat it. I just try not to eat myself sick. I don't drink eggnog. I don't drink alcohol at all, but not for any external reason, but because I have some sort of allergy to it and it makes me sick. So I just don't have it. But it's not out of any other reason. In
Right.
terms of being in the holidays, I also really try to give myself a break. I understand this is a special time of year, and I don't want to spend it freaking out. I don't want to spend it either saying no or freaking out about having said yes. So I really just tried it to the best of my ability, and it's taken years for me to. And I have plenty of setbacks, but it's taken me years. But generally speaking, I'm just much more relaxed about food than I used to be.
It's just so interesting. I mean, this is just a good example of something that it just over and over I'm surprised by, even though I know perfectly well it's true, which is that different tools work well for different people.
Totally.
And just because something works for one person doesn't mean it works for the other. And that's fine. Like, we don't have to convince each other. We don't have to decide one person's right and one person's wrong. It's just like, well, if this doesn't work for you, maybe try that. And I find incredible freedom from discipline and having these rules. And I just don't eat. I don't get snacks at movies because it wouldn't even occur to me, and that's just sort of a rule that I follow, I guess. And that works for me really well. And what you're doing works really well for you. And I just think it's fascinating to see that, I think there's just this impulse of finding well, what's the best way, or what's the right way, or what's the 7 bullets that we can all follow. And the fact is, no tool fits every hand. And our approaches are exactly the opposite. And yet we're both feel so energized by the approach that we've taken. And I just think that that's just really fascinating to see over and over and over again.
I completely agree with you. The one thing I would say though is it's hard for me to overlook the pernicious impacts of the diet industry writ large, and the implicit message of much of the industry, which is that you are defective if you don't look a certain way, and this is particularly aimed at women. And but we
Oh, I'm not
see,
even talking about
yeah,
appearance. I'm talking about
yeah,
things like cravings
yes,
or feeling like you're feeling regret for something I mean, just feeling good and like just, you said boredom. I mean, that's the thing. I just find it so boring. It's so boring. I'm just like, I don't want to think about it. And for me, if I cross it off the list, I don't have to think about it. And that works great for me. And I also think that it might work better for a lot of people who just haven't tried it because they think, well, this sounds so extreme. Like I would never try that. I'm like, well, if one thing doesn't work, try something else because I've talked to a lot of people where they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know this is a thing you could do. Just like intuitive eating, it's like, oh, this is an approach that really works for some people. I think it's just good to know that it is I think it's a tool that in my own view, I think a lot of people might like better than they think. It sounds harder than it is. If you're the kind of person for whom that's true. So I mean, it's like what's that old thing? Like if you're the kind of person that likes that kind of thing, that's the kind of thing you like. It's like that's what it is. If you find that it's just another way to get out of that cycle. Okay,
no,
so
just to be clear, I mean, I absolutely agree. There are some people for whom it works.
yeah.
I'm just talking about from a macro perspective. What's behind diet culture is this message, often implicit or explicit, that you're not enough the way you are, and that you need to conform to cultural beauty standards, et cetera, et cetera. This is true for men and women. And so absolutely, if you see the data that low carb eating, it not only is healthier, but it makes you feel better, and you feel that structure as you do really is liberating. Absolutely, 100%. I'm not here to say that that's bad. I'm just saying that it's worth sometimes red pilling yourself, seeing through the matrix of the way we think about food and learning to have a healthier attitude toward it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, I have so many thoughts on that. I have a whole thing about food cues in my book about the five senses. But we're not going to talk about that because now we're talking about holiday stress. So one last question before you go. How about, okay, and here's this very specific thing, but I do think it comes up with, so you can, I know it's almost time to go. One thing that often comes up that's difficult for us to manage for ourselves and also with other people is this idea of traditions. So, and it can come up in a bunch of different ways. One is like, there are traditions that are really important to me and you're not upholding them. And so I'm feeling disappointed and frustrated and I want you to do what I want you to do because we've always done it this way. Then there's the people like, you always want to do it this way, but it doesn't make any sense for us anymore. And I don't like, we need to move on. Now that we have little kids, we have to do something different. Or now that I live out of town, we need to do something different. And I don't understand why you're not willing to evolve this. I've made a choice in my own life. So now I'm vegan and I don't want to eat these things. I want to have different things. But no, what about the traditional of this? How do you manage? But this idea of tradition is so precious to us. And it really does add to happiness, like giving us this feeling of the passing of time and kind of knowing our role and this sort of like, there is a lot of happiness associated with it. How do you think about when you're managing conflicts arising from this very specific kind of holiday related tension?
Well, it's really hard, right? I mean, I think you're talking about like, where are we gonna, whose house do we go to on Christmas? Do we do it on our house? Do we even celebrate Christmas?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, this stuff's really hard because it brings up primordial issues,
Yep.
around your childhood and the kind of life you thought you would lead.
Yep.
And I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to this. I agree with you that traditions can be really meaningful, and I also want to honor the fact that for many people, this can create a lot of tension in your relationships.
Sure.
If siblings you grew up with no longer want to celebrate the holiday in the same way you did as kids, well, that can, for some people, be really destabilizing. And I think you need to, at that point, have some self-compassion that that situation sucks. And also do some reflective listening, which is a kind of investigation into why other people may feel the way they feel, so that you can really gather the information and in a way that and reflect not only what they're saying, but what the implied positive intention might be.
Yes, back to
really,
what you were saying earlier.
Yes,
yeah,
to really do some journalism into why other people have their feelings, and then try to communicate your own as best as possible. And I would try to deal with this well before the holidays rather than dealing with it in the midst of it.
That is a great suggestion, and very well timed, because right now we're just, well, we are, here in the United States, we just went through Thanksgiving, but we're sort of edging up on a lot of big holiday times. Right. So think it through, anticipate it. Don't like be there at dinner and be like, and have the fight like around the dinner table that isn't the way everybody wants it to be.
And give yourself a break too, that this stuff is, you're not crazy for getting crazy about this. Like it's really this is powerful stuff. Yeah,
it's hard. Well, Dan, thank you so much. Thank you both for joining this conversation. Yeah, thank you. It's so great. Dan Harris, longtime journalist, author, co-founder of the 10% Happier app. Dan, you are so thoughtful and so realistic too, about how we can be more mindful, whether we're using meditation like you or not like me, not using meditation, to live happier, healthier, more productive and creative lives. Thank you so much. This is so much fun.
Thank you. Always great seeing you. And I know we're past Thanksgiving, but I'm eternally grateful to Gretchen Rubin for supporting me when very few other people did when I was writing a unlikely to succeed book called 10% Happier 10 years ago. So thank you, Gretchen.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.